Today, the Grandmaster difficulty for the weekly Nightfall strike just released, and after getting a completion under my belt, I asked my Twitter viewers if they would like a guide. 72% answered yes, so that's what brings us to today's video. Also, there was a good comment on my thread that said they're curious what a PvE endgame build looks like, and I hope to go into that. Since today marks the first day to actually do the Grandmaster Nightfall, we had no idea what to expect, so we went for consistent builds that involved one Titan, one Warlock, and one Hunter. That way, if we have to switch characters to complete it again, we have the same strategy in place. Also, I kept it very generic, so no matter what Nightfall appears, this loadout will have a good chance of completing it. I know that we could tune the loadouts a lot more to make the Nightfall completion faster for this specific Insight Terminus strike, but overall, this should get the job done. Before getting into it, let me give a quick thank you to Dimitri and Drewski, both of whose Twitter profile will be in the description below. Now let's get into the actual builds. I'm about to sound like an auctioneer, so bear with me, but I'm trying to save you time. For the Insight Terminus, I decided to play Titan. The kinetic weapon of choice is the 7th SERAPH Officer Revolver, with Vorpal weapon for more damage against bosses and champions, and 4th times the charm so I can kill individual adds in one magazine. In the mod slot, I'm using Unstoppable Hand Cannon, which staggers all enemies and also stops unstoppable champions. For my special weapon, I'm using the Ariana's Vow simply for shield-piercing ammunition, which does stop barrier champions, and it's pretty good at range. For the power weapon, I'm using Wendigo simply for blinding grenades, which are very useful for survivability. In the same sense, I'm using the exotic gauntlets, the CITAN'S RAMPARTS, so that I can shoot through my towering barricade, which makes it so much easier to stagger key targets, flashbang, and keep my team alive. For the rest of my armor, I'm using artifact mods. This one is Tyrant Surge on the helmet. Dealing damage with arc melee, super, and grenades creates a Warmind cell, and then on the chest piece, this one's Hammer of the Warmind. If I detonate that Warmind cell, it causes disruption and staggers unshielded combatants. On my boots, I'm using Global Reach so that the explosion radius of the Warmind cell is even bigger, affecting more targets. And then on the mark, I'm using Lightning Strikes twice. This is basically just a boost to my grenade recharge, which is useful because I am using Top Tree Striker for 2 grenades instead of 1, and the Flashbang, which same reason as Wendigo, is just blinding everything and keeping everybody alive. Using Towering Barricade, of course, for the Ramparts. And now we're moving on to Dimitri's build. His is centered around having infinite special ammo, which is why he uses Geomag Stabilizers and Special Finisher on his Bond. The Geomag Stabilizers work so that if you have 3/4 of your super and sprint, it will refill the bar. And then if you use your Finisher to get special ammo, it will take about 1/4 of your bar away. So effectively, you get infinite special ammo, which is why he's running 2 special weapons, a sniper rifle and an Ariana's Vow. He does a lot of ad clearing with his machine gun, and overall it's a very smart build because supers aren't too useful in endgame content. Note this Power of Rasputin mod where you get bonus damage if there's a Warmind cell near a group of enemies, and of course he also has the Tyrant Surge and Thundercoil for extra melee damage. Drewski's build is all about invis and survivability. Shout out to my boy EK for coming up with the framework of the build. Check out this specific build in the description below. The idea is use the Exotic Assassin's COWL helmet to finish an enemy, which gives you invisibility and a portion of your health. You have the Warmind's Protection, which will make it so you take reduced damage from enemies when you're near a Warmind cell, and then on the Cloak, he has Global Reach for better radius on the explosion, as well as 1/2 finisher, so he gets his entire melee charge for the cost of 1/6 of his super. Note that he's playing Bottom Tree NIGHTSTALKER, so he gets the Vanish and Smoke melee ability, so he can make the entire team invisible, as well as Gambler's Dodge, so if he dodges near an enemy, he gets his melee charge back as well. For his weapons, he's using the 7th SERAPH submachine gun with Vorpal weapon and anti-barrier rounds for the mod to handle the anti-barrier champions. He's using a generic Hammerhead for ad clearing, and the IZANAGI'S burden to help easily clear some champions. Now before showing the entire Nightfall, I wanted to focus in on this one important tip, and that is managing your unstoppable rounds on the hand cannon to keep your team alive. So you see that unstoppable shot. Whenever I shoot this enemy, he will stagger, but it's only during certain animations, so you have to time it right. So you can effectively keep an enemy stun locked or in between animations so that you're never shot at. Staggering him right now. Take the kill. I'm staggering him as soon as he shoots again, don't worry. I didn't have enough time to mention this in the live clip, but When you defeat an enemy with a 7th Seraph weapon, the Tyrant Surge artifact mod will drop a Warmind cell on that weapon kill. This only works with the 7th Seraph weapons. So this is why I spent a couple extra minutes today farming out a 7th Seraph revolver, and of course Drewski was using a 7th Seraph submachine gun. These Warmind cells do add up, and I think I actually got one of the more competitive rolls of this 7th Seraph revolver for PvE. With all that out of the way, let's get into the strike and the generic strategy, which is sit in the back of the room, pick one target at a time, fight the champions when you're all together. If you're overwhelmed, start using those blinding grenades to create Warmind cells, getting the enemies blind, and cleaning up as a group. Don't try to get too ballsy here and get out of position, because you will get deleted. There were a couple times where I was sort of experimenting like, I wonder if I'll die to this, and sure enough, 1 or 2 shots is all it takes. If there's one thing I really need to hammer in on this guide, it is the generic strategy, which is on screen now. Sit in the back, flash, stagger, kill, repeat. Someone might have already typed it into the comments section by now, but I mentioned earlier that I don't think the supers are that important, so use them for utility, like the melee finisher, special finisher, etc. I don't use that on this character, so I use my super as a get out of jail free card whenever I have to res his teammate, or go get some ammo, or ultimately just need the extra damage resistance and mobility in hectic situations. You can avoid hectic situations by just implementing that generic strat a little bit better. Now, for specific Nightfall tips for the Insight Terminus, I think the deadliest enemy in this strike is actually the Legionary, because they have this frag detonator, this grenade, that they shoot over cover, and they can stick onto your character and kill you in one shot. Even if you stagger them or flash grenade them in the animation, sometimes the shot still goes through and the frag detonator will land in your cover, and you will need to think of something quick, which is why I use the CITAN'S Rampart exotic gauntlets so that I have extra survivability options. For taking out most rooms in this strike, I would advise leading with some sort of flash, then taking out the snipers first, then the legionaries, and if you're getting attacked by any champion, like they have aggro on you or your teammates, then use that unstoppable shot to stagger them, clear those trash mobs, then all together focus on the champions. And if you practice the stagger shot, you can do it pretty safely. If not, you're going to have to utilize invis, different angles, and that CITAN'S Rampart barricade. The middle room in this strike is where you'll be spending the bulk of your time, because there's the most champions, most enemies, and a mini objective to complete, which is just take a ball that spawns and slam it in the other side of the room. It's best to send your hunter alone. Keep in mind that once you pick up a ball, enemies will spawn, so try to fakey it, grab it, go to the back of the room, clear ads, then once you clear all the ads, pick up the ball again, send the hunter. He will invis when he slams and make it back, but if he has any sort of trouble, you and your other teammate in the back of the room try to flash the rest of the enemies to blind them and secure a safe passage so your hunter can go to the back of the map, and then you rinse repeat. Oh, I'm losing my voice in this guide, so bear with me. So yeah, that's pretty much the generic strategy. Clear the room, send the hunter invis. You might have noticed I died a couple stupid deaths here, but that's fine. There is a life counter, and every time you kill a champion, you get an extra life. The majority of lives lost aren't really going to matter, because in the boss room, if one of you goes down, it is very hard to recover from, so I almost consider it a loss if you're dying in the boss room during some of the hectic situations. One very important thing to be aware of in the strike is that you have a 45-minute time limit before you get kicked to orbit. We took a couple deaths in this one for the advent of speed and having reserved lives in the boss room. Even though in the boss room if someone's dying, it's a hard recovery during the hectic parts of the fight. I do think this Grandmaster Nightfall strike is easily doable without dying, and maybe that should have been the case to begin with, but I'll save my opinions on the Nightfall strike for after this generic guide. Or rather, I'm just going to talk about them now, and whenever I see something on the screen that's relevant to your success, I will talk about that. Otherwise, I will just go into my opinions on the Grandmaster Nightfall strike release, because it's already in the comment section. I know someone didn't wait to watch the whole video before saying it. Someone's gonna say, oh yeah, it was tough, or it was fun, but the rewards suck. Yeah, I know. I made a whole Twitter thread on this, and I'm going to read it pretty much verbatim here, because I think I said it well. So we'll start off with my reception to the difficulty. I would say in terms of difficulty, I would say it's easier than any day one raid encounter. the most difficult activity ever in my opinion is Skull Loss on release weekend back in Destiny 1, especially if you did not have Galahorn. The Grandmaster Nightfall, on the other hand, is much more difficult than the Master Nightfall, but it could still be much harder. Now for the discussion you were waiting for, let's talk about the rewards. Fundamentally, should the most difficult activities provide the most powerful rewards, or should they remain as a cosmetic challenge for aspiring players? That's really up to you. I think a reasonable compromise would be to make challenging content curb RNG to allow the most invested players a guaranteed path to the gear they've been hunting for. Consider the following reward structure. Completing a Grandmaster Nightfall will give you the Master Nightfall loot plus other things, a curated strike weapon, a Grandmaster Gunsmith bounties that offers 1 Masterwork reroll on 1 single weapon, a 5% weekly XP boost, sexy cosmetics. You could even go as far as saying you could reroll the actual stat distribution on an armor piece or something like that, another bounty. I don't know. But in addition, I think Bungie should also up the ante for the TWAB, the weekly newsletter at Bungie. Imagine that the world's top 10 fastest times are rewarded with additional items. You can have a real prize pool, in-game cosmetics. Really, the possibilities are endless. Oh, key point here. We clear the room, then we go invis right when that Vex gate opens, and we run past it.
Alright. 10 minutes on my life saved. Good shit, guys.
Continuing on with the Twitter thread, I do think difficulty in games is important because it gives players potential for infinite replayability. Low skill and high skill content should both be represented in games, but inevitably, low skill players will love a game enough to passively become highly skilled. If this is Destiny's best answer so far to the compromise of skill disparity with these content releases, then I may be unfairly expecting too much. Oh, also again right here. You see how that red ring, you have to stand on it to start the boss encounter? The enemies that spawn are infinite, so at some point you have to clear the enemies while also standing on the circle. Anyway, back on target, thank you for listening to me read this thread, and for those of you who answered the poll, my content does take a lot of time to make, so I try to invest that time where my viewers actually want it. And if a lot of you have no intention of doing the Grandmaster Nightfall because it's not rewarding, well then I don't think it's really a smart use of my time. For the actual strike guide, this boss fight goes on for quite a while. I found one area that I like to stand in, and I pretty much just stand there using my Vorpal weapon primary to take down most of the health, then saving my special weapon for when I really needed to clear some ads. Same strategy. Flash, stagger, kill, repeat, etc. When the boss gets down to the last 30% of its health, it will start being more aggressive, so keep that in mind because you do not have a radar because of one of the modifiers. So the best way is to save all your Wendigo ammo and your flashbangs so that when the boss is in front of you and you need to run, but there's ads blocking your path, you can just shoot Wendigo at the floor and make them blind, which frees up a couple seconds. And then if you're safe from the boss still, go ahead and kill those enemies. And if you run out of all your primary ammo, use your special and your Wendigo and whatnot, and you see a brick on the floor of power ammo or special ammo, just use your super to go pick up all that ammo and use that ammo to stay alive. When you get the boss nearly half health, you will have to capture these rings to summon the boss out again to continue doing damage. So the best way to go about this is just capture the rings one at a time, use your flashbangs and your invisibility to capture the points, and watch out for those void walls. This boss has an attack where he sends out 3 void walls that have this jumping catapult effect on your character. Just avoid those entirely. If you step on them, you're pretty much dead. I think that covers all the tips for this entire strike, so I'll just talk about my vibe on the overall season right now. So obviously the main lure of the season was supposed to be Trials of Osiris. For me, that wasn't the case. Personally, I was looking the most forward to the Grandmaster Nightfall. Because for PvP, the greatest challenge has always been the competitive playlist, particularly in Season 3, when it was the most difficult to get to 5500, and once you made it there, you were guaranteed to match other good opponents. Unfortunately, over time, the community at large complained about the competitive playlist being a little too difficult, which to me is kind of funny, but also it ruined the competitive playlist, because now, when I search at max rank, the players I find wouldn't have even come close to that rank in previous seasons, which means that the whole point of matching good teams is now not possible. So since I can no longer go to a ranked playlist for a ranked experience, Trials of Osiris is that next best thing, and I was somewhat looking forward to actually having incentive to win again. Keep in mind, I've had maybe 50 hours total of this conversation with my Twitch chat, and it always boils down to the reason that the community at large likes Trials of Osiris is because it's a bite-sized competitive option, whereas the comp playlist may require months of investment, Trials may only require a weekend. A lot of people also value the card-based matchmaking system because it gives them the best chance of going flawless, whereas if it was skill-based, it would just be the exact same as any other playlist, and nobody would go flawless, because if you're playing 7 teams in a row that are on your skill level, chances are you're going to lose 1 or 2 of those matches. So with card-based, you match on the amount of wins you have. So if you have 3 wins, you're likely to match another team that has 3 wins. And this opens up the gates so that you can match any type of skill level that has those 3 wins, making it so that most of the population can just keep running cards until they're lucky enough to match a lot of opponents weaker than them. Now, compared to a ranked system, once you get to where you're supposed to be in ranked, it is very difficult to move up without getting better at the game. You're not going to match 7 opponents in a row that are weaker than you, and you're not going to beat them every single time, because if you did, your rank would move up, and you would just start matching opponents who are also of that same rank. And if you lose, you'll get knocked back down to where you're supposed to be. That's the nature of a ranked playlist. And again, to hammer it in, the comparison to Trials of Osiris is that if you're average skilled, you could actually get lucky and match 7 teams in a row that are weaker than you. So when you combo that possibility with also a good loot system, it really incentivizes players of most skill levels to at least give it a try. And if the loot system also gives consolation prizes, it gets players of all skill levels at least giving it an attempt, which also increases the player population pool, which makes it all the more likely for those average players that were lured in with the lucky chance of matching weaker players, even more of a chance to do exactly that. So now to summarize this conversation so far, Trials needs a population to feel good to most players, but it also needs a good loot system to have a large population. So if you're wondering why Trials failed, ding ding ding, it didn't have a good loot system, so it didn't have a good population. And the population dwindles because some players just don't like to lose in a competitive mode. While that's a little surprising to me, the numbers are telling. And the irony of it all is they complained away a ranked playlist, which is what gave me the choice to play ranked opponents in the first place, and in its place, skill-based matchmaking is everywhere, including the ranked playlist, except for Trials of Osiris. So the high skill players want to play Trials of Osiris because it's the only place they don't have to be forced into skill-based matchmaking, which generally will force shitty connections on you and an unfun time because you're not able to use the whole sandbox. Even the other playlist without skill-based matchmaking called Classic Mix is just too small and hidden away in the playlist section so that the players who should be searching for better connections are not, because they want the shielding of skill-based matchmaking. And since the higher skilled players don't want to deal with shit connections, they're the only ones that remain in the Classic Mix playlist, so they end up having to deal with shit connections anyway. And now to escape that foreign connection nightmare, they go to Trials of Osiris where it is card-based and they're very likely to match opponents of the same connection quality. And since these are high skill players we're talking about, a lot of high skill players in these games get good because they have the drive to get better. And so they don't really care if they lose. Losing is a learning experience and they're going to stay in. Whereas the players who don't have that inherently are just going to leave and go back to the shielding of skill-based matchmaking. And so now, because of a terrible loot system, we're sitting in a population dwindling situation where these problems were just minor annoyances at first are now gaping holes in the ecosystem of Destiny. So to solve this, there needs to be a better Trials loot system, but also a ranked playlist so you can go one place in the game to guarantee opponents of the same skill level, whereas the SBMM shielding needs to get toned down severely so it's not a wake-up call when normal players search a non-SBMM mode. And if they do want to play opponents on their own skill level, they would just go to the ranked playlist. And so this creates a very healthy ecosystem where people want to play PvP. Assuming, of course, that the overall PvP balance that season is actually good. And this season, a lot of people have complaints and there are a couple outliers, but I overall think it's pretty good. The general day-to-day play of Trials of Osiris, the mode itself, is pretty good, though I do think that third-person peeking needs to go because it creates stalemates by giving free information for no risk whatsoever. Sword hilt, same thing, so maybe they shouldn't work without ammo. And then also, the round timer needs to be trimmed down to 1 minute to actually promote playing the objective in trials and not sitting out the intellect stat, which could also be remedied by changing the intellect stat to Paragon, so that if you want a faster class cooldown, that is now your intellect stat, instead of getting it for free and then throwing off the balance of exotics that have to deal with Titans, Hunters, and Warlock, and having that utility come up too often for where the balance was initially intended. And don't try to argue with me that the intellect stat is important to PvE, because even at the Grandmaster Nightfall, the hardest content in the game, my team builds around not using a super. And even if we wanted a super early, there's a lot of ways to do it. A lot of perks in the game that can build super energy early by actually participating in the match instead of passively getting a faster super and avoiding the objective. You might say I went extremely off topic here, but it's actually on topic. This is all said for a reason, to get back to why I am excited for the Grandmaster Nightfall, but I can see all this at a glance. But I was never shown any of this. I wasn't invited to a Bungie summit specific to Trials of Osiris or anything, because if I was, I would have just raised my hand and said, hey, about this loot system. First of all, it doesn't really seem like the Trials loot is enticing enough. Second of all, it's lopsided, so couldn't you just, I don't know, intentionally not win matches to farm out the better loot that should have been at the flawless end to begin with? Oh yeah, also remember the, what were they called back in Destiny 1? They were like consolation prizes just for trying. They were bounties. I remember you would get gear just for trying in the playlist for bounties. I think that's a really healthy idea to continue with, because I don't see that in the system. You see, I would structure my feedback even more politely than that just to get the point across. But of course, I didn't see any of this, so I couldn't have stopped it. And looking back at the time frame, even if I was invited to a trial-specific summit, remember, I mentioned that I wasn't even excited for Trials of Osiris coming back because it wasn't really content made for me. The comp playlist, competitive ranked playlist, on the other hand, was made for a player like me. So I feel like my feedback there is much more valuable. Whereas for someone who really enjoyed Trials of Osiris in year one, I think they should have had a seat at the table, and hopefully they could have saw through this loot system. And before any salty person types up that I ruined Trials with that farming video, no, it was way too obvious. You're either telling the entire Destiny population that they're dumbasses or calling me a genius, and I know for a fact that I am a dumbass. So that's not happening. Let me break this one down for you, just the math of it all. The chance of getting the equivalent, which is Mindbender's ambition, I could run that strike for 5 weekends in a row, non-stop, and not statistically get that roll to drop. But if in one weekend, because of a flawed loot system, I'm not going to tell my community about it so that they can have the choice themselves to either throw away the weekend because they know people are not playing to win, or try to exploit teams who are farming with a better chance to go flawless, or farm themselves for a guaranteed good shotgun and save yourself potentially 5+ weeks of Mindbender strikes? No, that's non-negotiable. I'm giving my community the choice every time, and if you subscribe to me, that's exactly the honesty that you're going to get from me. So I know who my real subscribers are, and I appreciate the hell out of you. But let's just toy with the straw man one more time, because I read my comment section and some of you are really emotionally charged when it comes to this player morality side. So ask yourself, anytime you win in Trials of Osiris to get loot, right, someone has to lose, and you are denying them loot by you winning. So do you feel bad? Do you message the other team that, hey, after I go flawless, I'm going to group up with all of you and we're going to go flawless again so I can guarantee that you get your loot? No, I guarantee you every single person in the comment section that typed up something very mean does not do that. So, morality of the player? Sorry, dude, look at the fucking mirror. And now that all that rant is done, I can get back to where I started this topic. Because of all of these things that I just mentioned, with the downfall of PvP from a lack of loot system from Trials and how that's all intertwined, I was super excited for difficulty in PvE. This makes it so that all the intricate elements of the sandbox, the perks, the armor and weapon rolls, all this combines. The mastery of the game is actually necessary to succeed. When there's content like that, everything in the game matters. When there's not difficult content, none of it matters. And before you say that's only catering to a really small population, you are right. But also consider that this is a MMO. And people play MMOs with the intention of investing a lot of time. And once you like an MMO, you passively become good at it. And once you become good at it, there's a need for high-end content. You won't even realize you become a hardcore player. You will eventually be this player that the content is made for. Now, for a new player just getting into an MMO, it's a very hard sell for them to become invested in the game when they know from the get-go that the end game loop is not very fun. or rather that all their efforts that they do in the early game are not very relevant. Either is a recipe for disaster. Because at the end of the day, if I wanted to just play a video game for a couple hours of fun, I would probably pick like a AAA action story-driven game. The most highly recommended one that I could come up with off the top of my head is Resident Evil 2 Remake. I highly recommend that one if you just want to play a game and have some fun. The thing is, with those games, the profit is kind of obvious. You spend time to make the game, sell the game for $60, rinse, repeat. But for an MMO, for a Destiny like right now, it's free to play with some sort of season pass model and a lot of microtransactions. So to turn a profit, they have to go with a different approach. And I've always been the kind of individual that will buy all these expansions. I'd even pay a subscription service if the game is good, and consider the microtransactions as a virtual tip jar. And so anytime I see the game is adding things that I highly value as a player, I want to throw a couple dollars in the tip jar. But it's been a long time. I don't even think I have bought microtransactions up until recent in Destiny 2. The turning point in Destiny for me buying a microtransaction just to say thank you was when the last word was finally tuned. Previously in Rumble at my skill-based matchmaking bracket, if one slightly above average player threw on last word, then they were so far and beyond the rest of the lobby that everyone had to throw on last word just to compete. And when I threw it on, people had a habit of just leaving the match outright, denying me the ability to even play a first-person shooter in the first place. So when the last word was tuned, I bought some microtransactions.
All right, chat, this is a very, very important moment in the Destiny 2 anime where I used the silver that I've had since the beginning of the game and never bought anything to buy a weapon ornament. And you know why? Because this meta, besides sniper rifles, is actually good.
So there you have it. I think I'd be a lot more comfortable buying even more microtransactions in the future if the Trials loot system is cleaned up just to begin with, and then a couple PvP outliers. Can we please have one season of PvP where there's not like 2 or 3 things that just completely run the show because they're unchecked? Ultimately, can we get a balance pass, not once a season, or every other season or whatever, but a couple times per season? Also, in terms of player feedback, let's start integrating this into the game. I want there to be a push for a polling system where you're given a free, like, I don't know how much something costs. Let's say 500 silver given to players who at the Eververse store take a player poll. And it says, what is your satisfaction with PvE right now? What is your satisfaction with the raid? What is your satisfaction with PvP weapon balance? With Trials of Osiris? And on a scale of 1 to 10, you just click those and go claim your 500 silver. I feel like the information gained from those will just make it so much more abundantly clear than it already is for what aspects of the game need improving. You could also use that data in tangent with where you see these players spending the most of their time and see where this revenue is generated from so that Bungie can make a more intelligent decision on what kind of content to keep creating. I'll add that that wasn't entirely the reasons that I wasn't spending money for Eververse, because this game has been at points that I was utterly in love with it. Like, I would see my entire day just disappear. I didn't even think of it as work as a content creator. I just enjoyed playing the game so much. I would see those hours disappear from the day, and it would just be bedtime already. And sometimes I would just be like, fuck it, I'm staying up. That was in the double primary days where I felt that my player skill was rewarded. I didn't drop a match. I really had weekends where I did not drop a match because my team play and shot was so on point that it didn't matter. There was no bullshit button. There was no flinching a sniper rifle into the face. That's when I should have bought like hundreds of dollars of microtransactions. But at that time, there was a little bit of protest because in the Eververse store, there were some items that should have been reserved for endgame content, like a competitive playlist reward, like a raid reward, like a Master Nightfall reward or something like that. I'll give you an example. In the Eververse store, there was like a recluse ornament that should have been tied to one of the recent seasons of PvP. And then that would create an incentive for that playlist and a cool reward, a nod to say, hey, we appreciate that you like this mode. Here's a cool skin that you can earn. Now I understand I've easily went 15 plus minutes more than I've had to with this video, but I don't want any of this, let's call it negativity, to sink into any of my daily videos from here on. I just want to talk about the game that I enjoy playing. And if a little bit of constructive criticism sparingly used here and there will make it a better game in the future, I think that's my duty as a content creator. So thank you so much for watching the video, for respectively responding in the comment section, leaving your own constructive criticism in the comment section for any potential, let's say, Bungie dev to read it and that sort of thing is highly appreciated. This is a community in this game, so there's a lot of different opinions. Mine is not the only one.